Welcome to Clean Titans. Today, we're honored to have Shannon Dobbs, the disabled veteran and founder of Fellowship of Living Systems and author of The Food System Revolution. We're so pleased to have you on Clean Titans today. Can you please introduce yourself and tell us about your work with Fellowship of Living Systems, which is deeply rooted in solving real world problems? You often speak about weaving solutions that actually work and implementation crisis. Could you start by explaining what you mean by the implementation crisis and what drove you to focus on this gap between ideas and action?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for having me on your show. So, I am a retired entrepreneur and I'm also an Army veteran. And I got involved with the food justice movement about a decade ago, trying to get a grocery store into the part of Northern Nevada that I was running my businesses. I was running nightclubs. And I got involved. I had a commercial property that I was volunteering to donate some space to create a grocery store in downtown Reno. And I ended up forming a nonprofit organization and bringing the community together and essentially working towards a project scope that would allow us to get consistent access to healthy food into our community. And while I was going through that process, I learned the hard way that the reasons why we don't have grocery stores in inner city communities isn't so much because grocery stores are impossible in those communities, but it really more to do with a lack of interest in creating models that aren't the dominant supermarket model. And on the nonprofit side, really kind of an allergy to revenue producing models and market aligned models where we're really addicted to the redistribution process. And because of that, it's not really a sustainable process. It constantly requires fresh inflows of grant systems and support of all kinds to be able to prop up this system of redistribution the way that we have it set up. And unfortunately, it's not really scalable past the point where it is. And the organizational structure is so large at this point in our food bank system and in our food rescue systems that there's a very difficult time pivoting to new opportunities to take advantage of new resources and to be able to meet the need of our times with increased resource instability and multiple challenges that we're dealing with that are coming down the pipe. Our system just isn't set up to be able to pivot to meet these challenges. And so what I've done is essentially create a new type of organization. It's a public benefit company. It's designed to be impact focused, focused on direct action, and really aiming at upstream interventions where we can create small tweaks in the system that allow us to have cascading benefits down throughout the system.
You've said you got tired of hearing experts declare impossible the
Yeah.
very solution that you saw working every day. Can you give us a vivid example of a solution you witnessed working that was dismissed and why you believe it was dismissed?
I can give you lots of examples. The challenge is that there's a lot of programs that are working down on the ground that are being ignored by decision makers and policymakers. And there's a layer of communication that's kind of missing at the implementation level, where even if you have a successful strategy, it's not being replicated, it's not being scaled past wherever made it the success. So, one that I love to point out is Daily Table. That's a nonprofit grocery store chain that was started by Doug Rao, the former CEO of Trader Joe's out in the Boston suburb area, Dorchester, Massachusetts. And he started his process back in 2016, about the same time that I was getting going, with one store in an inner city area that was struggling to get healthy food access. And now he's up to, I think, a half a dozen locations and expanding. And he's doing absolutely amazing things, working in environments that everybody says is impossible to put healthy food into and impossible to create a grocery store model. And so he's a great success story. Another one is Las Vegas, also in 2016. Something happened in 2016. We figured a lot of stuff out. I don't know. BGM Grand collaborated with Three Square and they figured out how to use blast chillers to safely rescue prepared meals from hotel conventions. And that's a huge thing that throughout our history, we've never been able to rescue prepared meals because of the challenge of getting it from hot hold, ready to serve, down to refrigerated or frozen so that we can transport it back into the community. These guys cracked the code. They figured out how to use blast chillers. This is a piece of equipment that allows them to go from 160 degrees and above down to frozen in less than 2 hours, which means that we can now move that food back through the community. We can repackage it. We can repurpose it. We don't have to choose between throwing it away or feeding it to the pigs. I can go on and on. There's so many other examples. This is just a situation. There's regenerative practitioners that have been working for decades to restore degraded land all over the world. They're doing processes that have been developed over millennium, and they're working, and they can directly impact our climate resilience capacity at the community level. But these strategies don't get elevated and they don't get expanded. So a lot of my job is really just putting these in front of people and helping folks to understand that we're not helpless. And we don't really have to ask for permission, because a lot of these strategies are scalable down to the point where they're accessible at the community level. And so a lot of what I talk about is like, how do we connect these dots and how do we make this work where we can get to it without begging for help?
Is this implementation crisis more about a lack of political will, institutional inertia, or perhaps a disconnect in funding models? What's your primary bottleneck that you encountered?
It's institutional inertia, but it's more than that. It's actually institutional objection to change. So when you've got a lot of money and a lot of resources and a lot of time vested in an existing model, I'll use the food bank as an example. That was started in the 1970s as a way to redistribute food in grocery stores. Well, now it's so big that it encompasses 1% of our entire gross domestic product every year in the United States, and they're still only focused on grocery store food. So when you start introducing ideas like this one that was developed in the food bank system, Three Square is one of the major food banks in our system, and they developed this program, but the food bank system doesn't amplify it through their own network. And even Three Square, from what I found out in 2022, after COVID and hotels started restarting their program, Three Square pulled out, and the MGM Grand had to turn it into an internal business decision in order to continue that going. So this is incredibly successful strategy that the nonprofits basically rejected, and they said, "This is not our model. It's not our core business focus, and we're just not going to do it." And I think that's sad.
One of your core focus is converting urban food waste into rural prosperity. This is a powerful concept. Could you walk us through the mechanics of how this works and the environmental benefits, particularly regarding emissions reduction?
Okay. So, two parts to this. One is just the realization and understanding that our urban environment creates a lot of waste, and we don't have systems set up to get it back out of the city and back onto farms. Some systems, but they're not great systems. We have bury it, burn it, compost it, again, feed it to the pigs. We've got a few options for getting food out, but we don't really have a systematic way to deal with food waste, with backyard waste. A lot of groups, like if you go up in the Seattle area, you'll see single stream composting systems where they'll put out a third container and you can put your waste and whatever in there. But here in the Denver area, we don't have that largely. I mean, neighborhood by neighborhood, if you do have it. And so we don't have it systematized. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We don't have these types of systems in place. So even though there are, areas where we figured this out, it's not being system in a way that's going to make it impactful at the macro level for the things that we collectively need to do in order to be able to reach climate goals. And specifically, there's that'll allow us to be able to get not just urban food waste, but like if you talk about big factories that are producing thousands of bottles a day, and they're going through a bunch of spent grain. Well, that spent grain can be, we now have the tools and the capacity to be able to very rapidly convert that spent grain into high quality topsoil that reduces drought, or that increases drought resistance, that reduces fire risk, that restores degraded soil, that reduces our irrigation costs, that, I mean, different cascading benefits. And the challenge is that solution is being rejected by the US markets because of a market mismatch, because our existing industries, again, are so used to composting. They're so used to a certain way of doing things that when we introduce a new strategy or a new breakthrough or a new ag tech or a new, doing things, our system is just not able to pivot. And so we have to create new systems to be able to address and to be able to take advantage of these. And this humisoil technology that I was talking to you offline about, this is a huge, and I'm approaching it as like coming from a regenerative practitioner model and saying, well, we've got a bunch of land-based developers, a bunch of folks that are really good at story of place and about developing potential of an area. They're really, really good at every aspect of that, but they don't have access to big scale tools. They don't have a lot of compost that would allow them to be able to expand their model. they don't have access to tools that will allow them to help transition conventional farmers over to regenerative agriculture so that we can then start healing the earth and actually start doing the things that we really need to do at scale. And so that's a huge area. And here's the other component of this that's really important is that farmers, unlike city planners and leaders, really understand the scope and the scale of the equipment and the logistics processes required in order to move this stuff around. So coming at it from an urban perspective, which is what I've been doing for, I keep running into challenges where nobody in the city really understands the scope of like, how do we do this? And so you get this knee jerk rejection of anything that's like outside of your lane, outside of this that I do. And the cool thing about the farming community is they're not restricted like that. They innovative professionals. These are business owners. These are people who are their families. Like they've got all that salt of the earth grassroots capacity. And for generations, they've been doing a lot with a little. And so what we're talking about doing is approaching this as a coalition and bringing together farmers collectives and bringing together all of the different capacity building groups that already exist out there and saying, hey, this is a thing that we all need. And this is the thing that we can all work on together. And if we get suppliers and buyers and farmers and ranchers and producers and all of the different groups together, we can actually solve these problems at scale.
You mentioned earlier, and you also highlighted in your MGN Grand Resorts case study article, where a successful food rescue program was discontinued by a food bank, but then internalized by MGM.
Mhm.
What lessons does this specific example teach us about institutional barriers and the potential for market driven solutions to achieve what traditional aid models might not?
I think it turns our common perception on its head. So we have a common perception that corporations bad, regulation, because if they don't have regulation, they're going to go out of control. And like that is the perception and that is the narrative. And then you've got this perception on the NGO world and everything like that, that all, they're all trying to do the best and they're all doing this. But the thing is, there's hidden power dynamics in every level of our society. And those power dynamics are very important to pay attention to when it comes to changing the status quo, when it comes to introducing transformative models, especially when it comes to introducing things that empower communities and create opportunities for sovereignty and capacity building without having to beg for help from, daddy grant provider every year. Like there's really very different dynamic that has to be dealt with here. And that really goes to the core of the challenge that we're dealing with is that we have a very large, unwieldy system that is top down hierarchical and that kind of dictates this is how we're doing it. And structure has a very difficult time pivoting and shifting current need. And unfortunately, I've spent several years trying to bang my head against that wall and trying to get alignment and collaboration. And about 2 years ago, I just got fed up and I said, who's actually wanting to have this conversation? And so I pivoted to the startup community and I pivoted to the farming community. And guess what? There's a lot of people who want to have this conversation.
How do you build community controlled food infrastructure in practice? What are the key components and what challenges do you face in getting these off the ground? Can you provide an example of a successful project?
One successful project that I like to point to is Food Forward. Food Forward is a California based nonprofit organization that is, they're a gleaning org. So, gleaning means that you're picking up food and redistributing it from where it's not wanted to where it's needed. It's the gleaning is in some form or another in the Bible. It has been around forever, where you pick up your harvest and everything that you're going to sell, and then you tell everybody to come by and pick up whatever you're not harvesting, and that ends up being the share that goes to the community. What we can do now is we have opportunities to be able to really expand our ability to systematize that process because we've got technologies like blockchain and AI that can really help with coordination and what's not happening with the resources themselves, but also who's supplying them. Really kind of reputation based system where certain corporations are the system and us are working in the system and certain community groups are working into the system and we're all helping each other and almost creating a mutual aid network at a higher level than just neighborhoods folding tables and trying to do the best they can with nothing. But when it comes to community ownership and control of resources, okay, so let me move over to the farmer side real quick, because one of the things the farming community in Colorado, here where I live, is with is that we don't have enough processing facilities in the state to deal with our harvests. So the farmers, in many cases, have to truck or ship their harvests out of state to get to where the processing is so that they can turn it into whatever final food product is going to go out on the market. And then in many cases, they have to ship it back in the state in order to compete against out of state growers and suppliers in their own market, which, I mean, a ridiculous situation. It makes it very, unnecessary food miles. And then on top of that, 40% of all the food that we grow ends up in landfills or folded back in the fields. So you've got it's kind of polycrisis situations, almost like the climate situation itself. There's multiple different points in there. And if you adjust one and you don't consider everything else that's going on, you could actually make things worse. And that's a lot of what's been happening throughout the ages is that people, well-meaning people, will say, hey, we're going to put a policy in place that we're going to do a thing. And that has cascading impacts in a certain direction. And we don't find out many cases for decades how bad that decision was. Look at the food triangle from the 1970s, for God's sake. That's a giant mess. And there's still that's been debunked and overturned for decades. And there's still people to this day that think that the food triangle is the guide that we should be using.
Beyond food waste, how do these systems regenerate soil while reducing emissions? Can you explain the direct climate benefits of healthy soil?
So, okay, it's into the weeds on a lot of different strategies that are being developed and implemented around the world. One of them is called no-till, and there's a documentary called Common Ground, and one that came out a few years before that called Kiss the Ground. And for any of the listeners, if you're interested in understanding the nuances of about the whole world, I definitely urge you to watch those documentaries because they are absolutely amazing. They lay it out far better than I could. They educated me on kind of that I needed to go in order to really understand this. And that's the point of where I learned about regenerative agriculture. But the basic idea is that every time we go through and we till the soil, we're cutting all of the connections between the mycelial layer and the plant layer. And it's basically killing that topsoil layer. And then we fold it back in and we start all over again. No-till recognizes that having the in place and not messing that system up actually increases our ability to absorb water, to nutrients, to basically allow the mycelium layer, the mushrooms, to be able to move nutrients around like they're supposed to. And so keeping the ground covered prevents weeds, reduces irrigation costs, and importantly, it reduces topsoil loss. Because every time when we're doing conventional farming, we're tilling that field up, and every time the wind blows, it pulls some of that topsoil layer. And every time we have a flood, it pulls some of that topsoil layer. So what's happening is we're actually losing our topsoil layer all over the earth because of conventional farming practices. So the whole idea of regenerative farming is to go back to stewarding the land in a way that we can restore that degraded soil and create carbon sequestration that stays in place. And that naturally does all of the things that everybody who's doing the carbon sink counting and all the moving the numbers around trying to justify what they're doing. Like there's a whole industry that's trying to do carbon negative. And here's this farming community that does it naturally and does it very well.
My last interview was with this gentleman from California developing electric tractors that are less weight and smaller, and they harm the soil a lot less than the big, huge fossil fuel tractors.
Yeah, and that's a big connection too between and because if we can get lighter, tractors to move the food around and we can reduce the amount of food that we're throwing in landfills, then we're hitting it from both angles. And we're really looking at this as resource stewardship instead of just, hey, we're going to do our project and who cares about the waste. And that's really just a fundamental shift in how we view these resources as something that we need to hold on to and we need to care about.
Your mantra, life's too short to wait for permission to save our communities and climate, resonates deeply with many. How do you empower communities to bypass traditional gatekeepers and start implementing solutions independently? What are the first practical steps to community that a community can take?
The number one thing that people need to understand is that nonprofits are still businesses. I'm an entrepreneur. I've sold successful businesses. I've paid off, small business association notes in the millions of dollars. I've controlled commercial property. I've gone through all of these processes for my own businesses of how you create a successful model that's sustainable, that can cash flow, that can pay staff, that can do all the things that businesses do. Nonprofits fundamentally walk into the game thinking, oh, I'm going to go get a bunch of grant money that's going to pay for this thing that I'm going to do. And so they're basically just project consultants that go on the ground. And for years, they go do the same thing and they keep getting paid to do that. And it's just not a circular, it's not a sustainable business model. And so a lot of what I'm teaching nonprofit organizations is don't be afraid of business. Don't be afraid of getting your hands dirty in the market. And like what you do to be self-sustainable. Food bank professionals that are absolutely terrified of the idea of running a grocery store next to their food pantry. But there's no reason not to do that. As long as you're not putting donated food through the food pantry, it's two separate operations. It can be run by the same entity, but that doesn't matter. And so the idea that it's got to be two separate worlds is and it's in my opinion the core of the fundamental reason why we're failing at solving these problems is because you got one whole sector that's saying no, we got to work through grants and we've only got to work through a distribution model and we've only got to do it this way. And then you got this other world that's like, yeah, we've got the tools and we know how to build it together, but we're making money and we're kind of busy, so what do you want? And figure out how to meld these two worlds between entrepreneurship and philanthropy, we can create stronger business models that support communities. And here's the thing, I can't get through to nonprofits. It's not working. The nonprofit world does not want to hear this message. So what I'm doing is I'm reaching out to community groups and leaders and farmer collectives and folks who really understand their business, but maybe they don't understand how to create a retail market in an urban environment. But you can do that. You take over a restaurant space in an inner city community and you can retool the commercial kitchen into a last mile food rescue location. You can insert a blast chiller in there and start rescuing prepared meals and serve them as grab and go right out of your store. You can rip out the seating area and put a small grocery store in place that serves commodity food, pantry staples, locally and regionally produce, and want to, you can redistribute whatever you buy at Costco. It doesn't matter what you put in the store. The community gets to decide. That's the point. But if we just keep following blindly this stupid, well, I consider it a dumb model, the supermarkets, they've been around since the 1930s and they've never been an efficient business model. We literally had to create the entire food bank system just to prop up the fact that the supermarkets waste so much food. And it's like, that's not the only store model we can use. We can use smart marketing to be able to get healthy food into inner city communities. And if we do it in a way that we're supporting these small stores with a logistics back end, we can start buying in bigger quantities and be our own wholesalers. So that's kind of the key. That's the secret, is really understanding how to scale business vertically, how to understand the entire scope of where you can grow new markets, working collaboratively so that we can all work together. Like your focus is energy. Create a living lab experiment here that's going to be about somewhere between 40 and 100 acres here in Colorado. And I'm already talking to folks that want to collaborate with us so that we've got shade tolerant crops underneath solar panels, so that we've got biodigesters that are solving food waste while generating biogas and while generating heat for greenhouses at the same time. Like, we have all of the technology, we have the capacity to be able to do all of this. We just need the will and we need support.
Well, we are working with everybody who's helping to clean up our future. You all critically observed that the government won't save us and spoken about the vulnerability of aid dependent models, especially with recent program cancellations.
Yeah.
How did this perspective inform the design of your solutions to be resilient against political shifts and funding uncertainties?
Well, nothing is proof against all political shifts because life is politics to an extent. I mean, you're not paying attention to politics. I guarantee your landlord, your boss, and everybody else in your world is. So we do need to be cognizant of the fact that we can't just check out. But that being said, a sustainable business model, it doesn't matter who's in power at the policy level. And we have a robust framework of laws and rules and regulations and policies in place right now that support the existing way that we do business in America and in Europe and in South America. Everybody's got their own system and it works pretty well for the most part. So the suggestion that we just incorporate entrepreneurial strategies in these efforts, really get smarter about how our business models work so that the business models are sustainable and the fiscal models have circularity in them so that we waste and usage of resources and increase our ability to steward the resources. Those are two main components. When I was running a bar in Reno, the first thing I did when I took the place over in 2006 was I went around and one by one I counted all the light bulbs in the building. And then I went around and unscrewed them all and replaced them with LED bulbs because I calculated that over the years I would save thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on electricity costs. And I was right. And that same applies over to MGM Grand. They figured out how to rescue over 5 million meals since 2016. That is an insane number of meals using this blast chiller technology on just 20 donor properties. Imagine if that was scaled throughout Las Vegas. Imagine if it was repurposed so that we understand how to use these blast chillers in agricultural formats to be able to rescue food coming off of farms and be able to actually save more of it. Or if you looking at like the Denver metro or urban area, you've got tourism, you've got hospitals and schools, you've got all kinds of different places where you can start pulling resources. And the vast majority of them are going to be glad to participate because their shareholders care about this stuff. And this ends up being a marketing win if they're able to basically sponsor and support, initiatives that really create innovative solutions in the community.
You mentioned land syndication model.
Mhm.
What allows communities to their food infrastructure? How do these models work? And could you explain this concept of adapted community owned renewable energy projects like solar farms or microgrids?
Yeah, absolutely. So in order to land syndication, let me example. I had an opportunity to take over a 56,000 square foot commercial property in downtown Reno. It was a former casino property, and somebody with a lot of money had built it on the second floor, and then ran it into the ground and went bankrupt. And I ended up buying the entire building so that I could get my hands on that nightclub. And then I opened it up in 2012, and I ran Rise Nightclub as my second location. So in order to be able to do that, I had to leverage federal resources in order to be able to get a loan to buy that property. And so I approached the Small Business Association and I said, "Hey, I want to get this property. Here's my business plan. Here's how it makes sense." We got in touch with the bank. We went through the whole process of really understanding the scale and scope of what I was doing, making sure it made some sort of, and we went to town. I bought the building. I opened the club. I went into business. I was right. Looking over at the world, get resources into communities, you got a really weird dynamic going on. Grant programs largely will not pay for capacity upgrades. So most of them won't for buildings. They won't pay for land. A lot of cases, they won't pay for equipment. So the whole idea of capacity building is that you have the tools and the capability to be able to do things at a higher scale. So instead of sitting there with a hoe, you got a tractor. Instead of sitting there, like basically you have a that can make our jobs easier, make our lives easier. But a lot of community groups don't have access to that because the grant programs won't allow them to buy it. Specifically, it's a control mechanism. So understanding that, and then understanding over on the other side of the world, you got venture capitalism. And that's where you got private investors invest in a business, and then they want to see that business grow forever. And then they want to sell the business and cash out and make millions of dollars. Like that's the dream on the sea world. And they do that over and over and over again. The problem is that model requires unlimited growth, and it requires extractive thought process because you can't afford to steward your resources. You can't afford to take the time to actually grow and develop a situation, and you don't want venture capitalists controlling a piece of your community assets. So you've got this. That's where problem. The third path is land syndication. That's where you create a land development project, and it doesn't matter if it's a community garden, it doesn't matter if it's a building for a living lab space or eco development or all of the different components of what we're building here in Colorado, or if it's something entirely different. Maybe it's solar, it's whatever it is. What you can do is just structure it so that the land and the development itself is the investment vehicle. And so then you invite investors to come in for a limited period of time, typically around 10 years, to align with opportunity zones and other incentive programs that the federal government puts out and that state governments put out to encourage investment. And then you say, well, the limit of your investment is right here inside this 10-year window. And during that period of time, we'll give you a reasonable return. You'll get a preferred rate of return up to X percentage, all the kind of details about how that works. And at the end of the 10-year period, once we have an established business in place, we're going to buy you out and we're going to refinance this whole thing. Now the investors go away happy, and the thing that buys them out is a community trust. Now the community controls that asset, and it is a fully functional business that's been developed over a decade. So now banks will loan on it. Now you have a history. Now you have all of the things that really stop communities getting into these types of business in the first place. So this is a way for us to bootstrap by using investor funds and then have it structured to where the investors have no control over operations, which is important. And ultimately, the ownership vests with the community itself. I think that strategy is something that is so powerful, not just for food rescue, not just the climate adaptations. I think is important, but also the energy side, because again, solar and wind and all of these development, it's all structure of the funding model itself, and stepping away from VC and this whole idea of owning the company and putting the investment into the land and into the development and the business strategy itself.
You're looking to connect with doers, pioneers, oddballs, and folks who give a damn. How do you identify and cultivate these individuals and groups? What makes a successful cross sector coalition, particularly when you are bridging urban and rural divides?
That is the big question right now. We are making some. So I came at this first started with really big picture stuff. A grocery store is not a cheap investment. That's anywhere from $1 million and up. You got to get access to land. You got to get you can build out. I mean, a brick and store is a big ask. So I came into this talking about this is the stuff we can do. And what I've come to understand is that we need to have multiple scales so that different people can approach it at the level that they're comfortable at. Not everybody is national or global scale talking policies and talking all this other stuff. And not everybody is even comfortable talking grocery stores or food processing centers, commercial kitchens or any of these other possibilities that we see proven models of in different areas. Sometimes you got to start in somebody's backyard or in a community garden, or just really connecting between different groups that may not necessarily see that they're even stakeholders. So one of the things happening in the farm movement is that more and more restaurant owners are starting to get involved with farms and really having more and more communication and really getting a better at tracking that whole process from where the foods come to where it ends up eventually ending up. Because we don't have that system from the fork back to the farm yet, and that's what we're focused on developing is the rest of the circularity in that system.
You invite people who are region curious to connect. What does regenerative mean to you in the context of food systems? And how can the principles of regenerative thinking be applied to the broader clean energy transition, perhaps in terms of resource use, circular economies, or even community regeneration?
Regeneration to me got my definition of Regenesis Institute. So there's a school of practice going back decades that I personally got a strong handle on what it means to be regenerative. And it's a really simple definition. It means putting more back than you're taking out. It's literally regenerating whatever it is that you're putting out. So it's a model. It seeks circularity. It seeks stewardship. It seeks opportunity to husband our way where we really value all of the different components of the decision making process, not just profits. And specifically in the system, regeneration means restoring degraded land and really figuring out processes where that itself can be just as productive as what we call conventional practices, which is heavy tillage, heavy chemical use. You're really slave the inputs that we're used to seeing in order to basically make up for the fact that we're not in a way that is natural. The design element where you can really observe how living systems develop in the natural environment, and then you can copy and they call it biomimicry. You can create businesses that align with those strategies. Is largely mycelial, and we follow the way mushrooms systems move nutrients, or way that they kind of coordinate how everything a living system. And so we look at like, well, how can we biomimicry elements that allow us to move resources through society and through the system, urban environment back to the rural environment and back and forth in a similar way than as how we observe it in nature.
In your Morlocks Ear Flappers article, you discuss information gatekeeping. How do you ensure that practical working solutions bypass these filters and reach the people who can actually implement them?
I have not found a way to bypass gatekeepers in institutions. What I found is that institutional gatekeepers have a lot of control. They have control in the media. They have control in back office conversations, the water cooler, innumerable, in the elevator, wherever they happen, that unconventional way to talk trash or to create blockages or to make sure an email sent on or whatever has to ideas from getting into communities. These gatekeepers are at every level, and they are essentially a challenge that we need to address. The way to get it is to talk directly to farming communities. I'll have a presentation in a farmer cooperative network. I go to small nonprofits that are down at the street level, and we start having conversations about capacity building to support them. And we start talking about like how can we collaborate group with this group to be able to find common ground so that we can start working together. I'm reaching out to us. That's a really big thing for me is that I'm not staying in the US system. And now that I've really come to an understanding of how much challenges there are in our system to changing the narrative and changing dynamics, I'm having conversations with folks in Europe and South America and in the Caribbean and in Africa and Asia. And there's a lot of places that are much more interested in solving these challenges than they are in preserving the status quo. And we're having some really good discussions and we're working towards on the ground projects and we're creating funding mechanisms to really get these things off the ground. And we're showing people how to do it. I've got workshops going out. Actually, October or June 18th, releasing a workshop where I'm teaching people. I have a 43-minute video that I recorded teaching people how to use blast chillers as a community group to be able to rescue prepared meals. And we're doing a free workshop, free seminar for anybody who wants to attend.
Excellent. We've talked to people from all six habited continents. We're doing incredible things
Yeah,
to clean up our future.
yeah. I'll with the penguins if I have to. Let's call Greenland and see what.
Well, I recently learned that you know how much ice is melting each year?
I'm not tracking it by the meter, but it's a lot. It's bad.
270 billion tons.
Yeah, it's bad, and it's accelerating. And and what I'm hearing is some serious mistakes in our calculation about how rapidly this was going to hit. And we're now scrambling to try and update our models based on the fact that nature is not playing along with our assumptions at all.
Yes, it's accelerating.
Yeah.
What role do direct market connections play powering both farmers and eaters? And how can we translate this direct connection philosophy into the clean energy sector, perhaps between energy producers and consumers?
Well, I mean, one of the things we need to is on is biodigesters because biodigesters that is clean energy. If you put agricultural waste and food waste and all of the different inputs that we can get our hands on through a biodigester, you're creating clean energy. And that can be packaged and distilled and compressed and injected right into the pipelines where put all of the other biogas that we pull out of the system. So that right there is a huge circularity. Technology has been around. I mean, literally, it's just the cow's stomach. That's what it is. So you put biological mass in, you get a substrate that can be put back as topsoil. It's a neutral, sterilized substrate. It's really good for your land. And I mean, it's garbage in, garbage out, gold in, gold out. Whatever you put in there is what you get out of there. So if you put PFAS chemicals and pesticides and herbicides and all that crap, you're going to end up getting it back on your land and getting it back in your food. So you have to be careful about where you're sourcing. Humus soil is another one. That one grows water from soil. I mean, I don't know exactly what with energy, but if you've got a photosynthesis from the soil using infrared energy to create water, that's going to reduce irrigation costs, which that's going to reduce the requirements that we have to try and do other Herculean tasks to try and preserve water throughout the states, and this especially here. Anytime that we don't food twice, we're saving energy. Sometimes our food goes around the world multiple times for processing, for distribution, for global aggregation. And for 40% of all of that effort to end up in a landfill, that's a lot of energy being wasted. So we got to think about this as this idea that we have to do more in order to keep up while ignoring the fact that we're just ignoring all of this waste that we could be repackaging, repurposing, and throwing back into the system. It's just a fundamental rethinking that we all have to go through. And I think energy is absolutely fundamental in this conversation. Another part of the conversation that we need to have from an energy perspective is the amount of energy that it takes to move food around. If we insert, and this is a little bit sky, but really aimed at the energy sector. One of the major challenges globally for energy is that aging electrical grids are having an increasingly difficult time keeping up with refrigeration costs and the needs of growing refrigeration. This freeze dryer technology and dehydration technology to remove the water content from food, it doesn't need refrigeration. So we could transport food around the world at a quarter of the volume, a quarter of the weight, with no refrigeration costs, and then rehydrate it at the end. If a chef gets dehydrated or freeze dried food and then adds water in the cooking process and rehydrates it, then the customer is going to be happy. The chef's going to be happy. The business is going to be happy because they paid less for to get that food there. They don't have to worry about spoilage as much because properly packaged freeze dried food can last for up to 25 years. Now we can start stepping away from the 3 day full cycle logistics structure that we have. Here in far highways shut down within, we're to start running out of food. That's typical for cities all across America. We have about a 3 day supply of food before the shelves start emptying out. And so we need to start thinking long term. We need to start thinking resiliency, adaptability, short supply chains. There's a growing that we're used to for the last 50 to 60 years is going away. We don't have a plan B. We do not think that it is so important that factor that you're in, whether you're focused on energy, whether you're focused on food. I mean, there's so many different little like all of this that we can hyper focus on. But the thing is, the big picture is the wheels are falling off the bus, folks. Wheels are falling off the bus. There's no other way to say it.
Shannon, your work provides powerful lessons on grassroots innovation and systemic resilience. For our audience, many of whom are involved in clean energy, what are two or three of the most critical transferable lessons from the food system's transformation that they can apply to accelerate the clean energy transition, especially at the community level?
Focus on farmers. That's the number one thing. Farmers have tools and funding resources that other groups have. They're hungry to tie in with energy. There's a lot of energy in the needs. There's certainly a huge market for renewable energy communities. Like I was saying, my friend is an electrical engineer that's energy over shade tolerant crops, and they're getting a lot better at it. They're getting the ratio up to about 160% aggregate. There's so much we don't have to focus just on oil and gas to be able to meet our energy needs if we just utilize our resources and really understand that there's strategies, there's solutions. So really just kind of widen your understand, time to understand. Go to my website, Living SRG. That's a great resource to start figuring out what's out there, what about it, how energy can collaborate with food to where we can really start aligning common goals. And I think we're all in this. We just don't know it yet.
You see the biggest untapped opportunities for collaboration between the food system movement and the clean energy movement. Are there specific technologies or approaches that could create powerful synergies?
All right, I think that can probably help people to understand the best about what's going on and how to take advantage of it. Right now, here in Colorado, we passed a law last year that's going to take effect at the beginning of 2026. It's going to require every company that does business in this state that's more than a half a million gross income. So it's exempting small businesses. If you're a certain size or above, you're going to be required to pay for your own waste stream. That includes bio waste. So when you start talking about, again, using more energy or using less energy for growing or building more energy, this is the same. It's two sides of the same equation. Anytime we can focus on wasting less energy and putting systems in place that align with wasting less food and wasting less other resources and being able to get circularity in place, this is going to help all of us. This is going to create an opportunity where, I can think of that we could align through this general thing, but I really want to focus on that in our state and other places around the country and other places around the world, there are opportunities like this where you've got policy that's starting to align a lot more with the needs of community for circularity and paying attention to those and really understanding this is a crack that we can grow our dandelions in. And as we start getting our roots and spreading in and really starting to make a difference and then scaling to the next level and the next level and the need to be coming to the same table and the same discussion from our different perspectives about how do we create a cohesive strategy moving forward.
What advice would you give to entrepreneurs or community leaders who are frustrated by the institutional inertia and want to start implementing solutions now?
Follow Fellowship of Living Systems. We're business models and we're kind of showing people how to entrepreneurial approach to climate mitigation, but even in the bigger picture to the social safety net. And it goes across the board of using business models and using entrepreneurial approaches to scale impact in the climate model, all of the different areas that we're trying to make it. That approach, that not necessarily the move past it. I mean, some of it is things, but a lot of it is agile development, the ability to pivot on a dime, the ability to take a small group and be able to do outsized effect. Like there's some fundamental principles in my world that you don't see in the policy world. You don't see it in government. You don't see it in the nonprofit sector. And they're the people that are largely responsible for making all the decisions. And so if you're in that sector, if you're in that world and you don't know anything about entrepreneurs, reach out. Let's talk. We can walk through the you're dealing with and maybe look at it through a strategic lens and try and figure out maybe the living systems design can make a difference here. I'm in the process of building a regenerative AI chatbot that can literally onboard people into like their own lived experience in the situation they're going through and help walk them through some ideas about how they can develop regenerative strategies where they're at and with their own situations. And that's going to be available on my website as soon as I figure out how to make a front end for it. So that'll be a great opportunity to really kind of dig in deep, because if you've got a well-trained AI agent that understands strategy at a high level and understands the frameworks for these processes and how they're being done in all kinds of different sectors where we're seeing these wins, and especially if it's got access to all those resources and has the ability to communicate with you about what your challenges are and maybe connecting those dots with you, like I think that's going to really be a good place to be for a lot of folks.
Looking forward, what gives you the most hope about our ability to build a truly sustainable future driven by decentralized community led efforts?
We saw this back in America. We have a tendency to wait way too long to take action. And then things get really, really bad. And all of a sudden, everybody says ocean. They start to wake up. And the next thing you know, everybody's mobilized and everybody's on the same page and doing everything all at once. And I think the one thing that we have that's an advantage in this country is that we do, like, our very nature is that we do that. I think what's happening right now is that we're starting to see between COVID, between regime changes, between policy instability, global market instability, all this that's going on. We see that the assumption that we had all these years is going to be okay, and that everything that happened yesterday is also what's going to happen tomorrow. We're starting to lose that naivety, and if we're able to really kind of walk that path a little bit farther to get out of this mindset that we're helpless, or we've got to wait for somebody else to make a decision before we take action, there's so many tools available. There's so many opportunities for us to take control of our own future. And, we've got a lot of resources available, a lot of folks that are interested. We just need to really build the strategy, get some wins under our belt. The specific projects that we're working on, really visible wins, even at the local level. Alpini, we're going all the way up to the metro regional level and building a commercial kitchen for food rescue and diversion. Like these are all potentially very visible strategies. And so if we got a folks out there that are looking for a way to make a splash, looking for a way to make a difference, well, I can point you to a few places.
Insights into building self sustaining community led solutions are incredibly valuable. It's clear that the best way to predict the future is to build it ourselves.
Dan Skippy.
And you're certainly doing that. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and inspiring us to be doers in the clean energy and climate change revolution. You are truly a clean titan.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for having me on your show. This has been a really incisive experience. I love the questions that you had. I really appreciate the opportunity to platform with you.
To our viewers, please join us next time for more insightful interviews accelerating the clean energy transition. Please subscribe, share, comment, and ask questions, and we'll get you the answers. And please tell your friends about Clean Titans. Let's build that sustainable future together.